Continuing the Python tutorial series, we're going to be making a more complicated calculator today with some new concepts. If you haven't watched the first video, I've linked it in the description. It's essential to get those foundations in place before you move on to some more advanced topics like we're going over today. All the code I'm making is in the GitHub linked in the description. So if you want to copy paste that or use it as a reference as we go along, feel free. I will be copying from the GitHub page just to speed things up and not type out, say, constants or things we've already gone over in the first video. So let's jump into Visual Studio and get started. First off, we're going over constants. I'm about to paste from the GitHub so I don't retype these constants. But what is a constant? In Python, there's not really a difference between constants and variables. It's really a naming convention. Here we have all caps, addition operator equals plus. This tells other developers that this is a constant because it's in all caps and this value does not need to change. Don't use it like a variable, use it like a constant. You should use a constant when the value of the variable is not supposed to change. So addition operator is always going to be a plus. It's a great example of a constant. And numbers, a list of numbers, also a great example of a constant. We're not adding any new numbers anytime soon. And a bad example of a constant would be the amount of times I've visited your mom's house, because that goes up about every week. So now that we've gone over constants, let's go back to the GitHub and copy paste these couple lines here, because we went over this concept in the first video and we don't need to retype that out. This is getting user input and we could test that it's all working so far. We have equation and we could say 3 plus 5, boom, that works. So now let's jump into one new concept, and that's removing white space from a string, which is a great practice for whenever you're getting user input. You could type dot replace on your string and put in a space first, which is the character we're going to replace, and then comma, and what we're replacing it with, which is an empty string or nothing. We're setting user input to the new user input that has no white space. And it's better if I go ahead and explain this with a print statement. And we can enter an equation with some random amount of spaces, 3 plus 6, and we get back 3 plus 6 with none of those spaces. It's a great way to reduce user error. Now that we've got that out of the way, what we have to do is find the operator in our new white spaceless string, because we can't guarantee the length of the string, so we can't base the operator on an pre-existing index. Now, if that doesn't make sense, we're going to go over arrays and you'll understand what I mean when I say an index. So an array is really a list of data. So we could say apples, peaches, oranges. And this is better to be named fruits than array, but this is an array of strings. You can also have an array of numbers, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 9. So arrays are pretty flexible. You can put any data in them. They're a list. And the cool thing about strings is that they are an array of characters. So our user input string 3 plus 6 is equivalent to an array of strings 3 plus 6, just like so. Each character is split into its own indexed value. Now, what is an index? Index simply is what points to a value in an array, and they start counting up from 0 rather than 1. So apples is fruits 0. I can demonstrate this with a print statement, just like so. This will print apples after we give any kind of value here. We're going to say apples, and we can also say user input string value 0, so the first letter that the user puts in. We're going to say 3 plus 6, boom, we get 3 back. So hopefully that clears things up when I'm saying index. We're just pointing to something in an array, or in this case, our string. So we have to find the index of our operator. We're going to set that to 0 at first, because the operator will never be at the beginning of the string, and we're going to use that value for a check later on. And we're setting an equation array to contain the numbers around our operator once we find it. So now let's talk about loops. We have two different kinds of loops, while and for. We'll be going over while later on in this video. For now, we're going over for. What a for loop does is it loops over an array. For instance, we have for letter in user input string. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to execute as many times as there are characters in user input string. So if we have our 3 plus 6, the first time the loop executes, letter is going to equal 3. The second time, letter equals plus, and the third time, letter equals 6. That's how the looping works. You can loop through numbers or strings. We need to loop through numbers to find an index here. So we can find the length of user input string with the len method, and this will return a 3 because there are 3 values in our 3 plus 6 user input. And when that changes, say we do 33 times 22, the length will change as well, and this is a pretty good fail-safe to make sure we don't have to hard code every single possibility. And now we're going to set this to a range because a for loop will not loop through one number, which the length of user input string will be. Range sets an array of values from 1 to the number passed in, creating an array that the for loop can go through. I know that may seem complicated, just bear with me here. It'll make sense once it's in practice. Now we need to check if the current index that we're on, we're going to change this letter to I for index. We need to check if the user input string at the current index in our operator's constant. This is a pretty self-explanatory line. We went over if statements in the previous video. In is a new concept. It just checks if this value is within this value. And this will find an operator. If it is, we're going to set the index of operator to the current index, which makes the index of our operator equal to the index of our operator. And we'll set the equation array to user input string split. Now hold on, this is a new concept. I'll explain it in just a moment. Equation array is going to be set to 2 different values, one before the operator and one after the operator. So this will split the string, as the method name implies, at the operator, which we've passed in here. And then our final line is break, which is another new concept introduced because we're doing for loop. Break just breaks out of a loop. It says we're done, do not execute again, move on with the code. And now for the math part where the calculating actually happens. We are going to do our check I mentioned before. If index of operator is 0, meaning that no operator was found, then this is an invalid string. If we're going to print operator not found, ... and that will be it. Else, we need to take the code from the GitHub because this is a lot to type. There's no really new concept here. All this is covered in the first video. I will show you this little keyboard shortcut, Shift Tab, to move things back. And the only new concept here is the arrays, which we've already gone over. You have your index of operator used to find the index in the string, which should make sense by now. And we are converting the parts of the equation array to integers so that they can be added together. Now let's test this out and make sure it works. So we could say 3, add a bunch of spaces, 3 plus 7, and we get back 10. So that seems to work. We could test our subtraction. 3 minus 1 is 2, and we keep having to restart the application as we run it, which is going to really annoy a user. So let's go ahead and introduce a while loop. While loops are different than for loops because they don't loop over anything. While loops check if a condition is set before it executes. To demonstrate, we can say while addition operator is equal to plus, then execute the loop, and this will always be true, but say this is a variable that can change within the loop, then it can affect the outcome of the while. And while will continue to just execute the code within it, which we will denote by the whitespace, which is Python syntax. So tab out, there we go. So as long as this condition is true, while will execute. The moment it becomes false, it will stop executing. So we're actually going to make this an infinite loop, which is a terrible practice in production, but perfect for our needs right now. If you're making games, console applications, that's really the only time you will ever use an actual infinite loop in production. So now we can enter our equation, 3 times 4, get back 12, see up here, and we can say 4 divided by 2 is 2.0. Always returns a float when we divide. Now I know this was a lot to take in today, a lot. You can rewatch the video as many times as you want. I highly recommend you delete all this code, try to type it out yourself, get a good feel for what you're doing, because when you don't follow along with some instructions and you just code on your own, you're really thinking about the concepts. So all I can say really is practice, practice, practice. Use the GitHub files. Use this video as a reference. I'm here to show you the concepts. You're here to apply them. I hope this was helpful for you. If you found value in this, be sure to like and subscribe. I will be releasing a part 3, the final part on this calculator next week. We will be making it more object-oriented rather than this procedural type thing we've been doing. Until then, just stay coding.